In the summer of 1981, the ordinary life of the Bakhemir family was turned upside down when they discovered that their only daughter, Michelle, had been brutally murdered. Michelle was the bright girl, always filled with hopes and ambitions, who had disappeared for a short while before her body was found in an abandoned neighborhood. While her father and mother were in a state of denial, Marianne, the mother, had her heart bleeding with pain. The police were chasing any leads, but initially they were powerless in the face of such a horrific crime. How could a family imagine that a moment of their ordinary life would turn into an endless nightmare? The pace of the investigation quickened, and in an attempt to understand the motives behind the crime, the police began searching for evidence that could either exonerate the killer or point to the identity of the culprit. Signs began to emerge that the murderer was a stranger, but had been in contact with Michelle at some point in time. There was no apparent motive or justification for the crime. Marianne began to feel as if life was slipping through her fingers, but hope still lingered. There was a deep feeling that the killer had to be found, even if that meant Marianne having to challenge everything for the sake of justice. After months of investigations, the police arrested the culprit, Christopher White, a man who had gone through difficult circumstances in his life, but no convincing explanation was found for his brutal crime. The first sessions of the trial were filled with tension, as the defense lawyers began to point to life circumstances and hardships that might have led him to commit the crime. The perpetrator still acted indifferently, his face showing no awareness of the gravity of his actions. Marianne, sitting in the front row, could not take her eyes off the killer, her heart filled with both anger and sadness. And as the court proceedings continued, her sense of frustration grew stronger. As the trial date drew closer, Marianne felt the weight of the days spent waiting for this moment. While preparing to face the killer in court, her emotions began to rise in an unexpected way. The trial was not just a legal moment for her, it was a moment of life or death. Everything indicated a difficult confrontation. Marianne began to question what justice really meant. Would it be served, or would the killer escape? Every passing day deepened her wounds. Finally, the day came when Marianne faced the killer, face to face in court. It was a momentous occasion. Marianne sat in her seat, gazing at the killer, who seemed uninterested in everything happening around him. He spoke in a low voice to his lawyer, but Marianne could not take her eyes off his face. That day was the first time she truly felt the depth of her pain, realizing that he was not just a criminal, but one of the figures who would haunt her for the rest of her life. His gaze, the coldness of his emotions, stirred a mixture of sadness and anger in Marianne's heart. As the sessions continued, Marianne felt every word and every gesture from the lawyers, the judges, and even the audience. Things were becoming more difficult, and her overwhelming emotions began to take over. The defense's words especially pierced her heart, as if they were stabbing into her very soul. She remembered every moment of her daughter's life, how she would look at her picture and think of her every day. She missed her dearly, and her mind could not accept the truth that there would be no more chances to see her. The internal pressure inside Marianne grew each day, and the lawyer's words weighed heavily on her heart. As the trial progressed, the defense of the killer started to stir controversy. Christopher White's lawyers began presenting claims about psychological influences or childhood issues, arguing that these factors contributed to his crime. Marianne could not bear to hear these words. Every word intensified the pain in her heart. How could anyone justify an act like the one this man committed? Marianne thought about every moment of her daughter's life, how she smiled, how she walked toward her dreams. Was her life just a victim of those circumstances? The feeling of anger grew inside Marianne. Days and weeks passed during the trial, with witnesses testifying about Michelle with love and respect, emphasizing her innocence and spontaneity. But Marianne could not bear those testimonies. She remembered her daughter in every moment. The images in her mind haunted her, how Michelle would talk about her dreams, how she always brought happiness to everyone around her. In those moments, Marianne questioned the meaning of life, wondering how the killer could be the one to survive while she and her family remained trapped in the memory of the daughter they had lost. The tension in the courtroom increased to unprecedented levels. Everyone seemed filled with negative energy. Marianne began to notice how the room was thick with the emotions of anger flowing through her veins. Everything around her felt heavy, and the moment was approaching a critical turning point. Marianne could no longer control her emotions. With every statement made by the killer's lawyers, the anger inside her grew stronger. In a moment that no one expected, Marianne lost control of her emotions. The trial had reached a critical stage, and the defense's words had stirred deep feelings of pain and anger within her. In that moment, Marianne could not remain calm. She quickly stood up, and with a sudden motion, pulled out a gun she had concealed under her coat and shot the killer in front of everyone. A wave of terror and shock swept through the courtroom. The lawyers, the audience, and the police were frozen in place. It was a deadly silence. Moments of silence were followed by utter chaos. Guards rushed to restrain Marianne, and the killer was badly injured but still alive. Blood began to spill onto the floor, and the faces of the attendees reflected total shock. Marianne, who had lost everything, saw the act as a form of revenge, but it was not enough. It would not bring Michelle back. The killer fell to the floor after being shot, and chaos spread throughout the courtroom. No one knew how the consequences of this horrific act would unfold. Marianne was shattered. There was no turning back. While the police rushed to stop her, the killer was receiving medical attention, and everyone in the courtroom was breathing heavily, hearts pounding. Immediately after the incident, Marianne was arrested, and her name became a media sensation. Shock swept through everyone in the courtroom, and the streets became divided between supporters and detractors of what she had done. Marianne cried, all her emotions pouring out from her heart. She wasn't sure if she had done the right thing, but everything had surged beyond her control. Newspapers and media outlets filled their pages with stories about the mother of the killer, how she lost her temper in court and attacked the perpetrator. As days passed, Marianne's case became a matter of public opinion. While some justified her actions, others rejected any excuse for her behavior. The laws were clear, but the heart of a mother was filled with pain. Marianne Bakhemir's second trial was full of legal challenges, and public opinion heavily influenced the course of the case. Some considered it murder, while others believed Marianne was a victim of unbearable pain. In the end, she was sentenced for an unprecedented crime, but her case gave a glimpse into the depth of pain a person can feel when faced with tragedy. Source of the true story. The incident occurred in 1981 in California, United States. The case was closed in 1983 after Marianne's trial and the court's recognition of her true emotions.